The clock on the glass wall of the 31st floor read 4 minutes to noon, and the only person in the room who knew the company they were about to buy would be worthless by Friday was the one nobody had asked. Her name was Tendai Mokoina, and she was 27 years old, and she was standing against the back wall of the largest conference room at Harlow Stride Capital because there were not enough chairs at the table for an intern. There were 12 chairs, 11 of them were full of suits, worth more than her mother's house. The 12th was empty, kept empty, the way a place is kept empty for someone who has not arrived yet. On the table sat a stack of signature pages bound in a slim leather portfolio and a single uncapped fountain pen lying across the top of it, and a sweating crystal pitcher of water that no one had touched. She had 4 minutes. She had found the thing at 2 in the morning. She had checked it 4 times. She knew she was right, and she knew that being right was not the same as being heard, and she knew the difference between those two things had a number attached to it now, and the number was $340 million. Panic would have been easy. Panic was a luxury, she had decided. Years ago, she could not afford. So she breathed. She kept her back straight. She kept her hands folded in front of her, one thumb pressed against the small brass disc in her palm, and she waited for the 1/2 second when the man at the head of the table would stop talking long enough for a person with no chair to put a single sentence into the room. Here is what you need to understand about that room before we go any further. Nothing in it was an accident. Let me take you back. Tendai grew up in a 3rd-floor walk-up on the east side of a city that does not need naming, the kind of building where the radiators knocked all winter and the hot water came in moods. Her grandmother raised her, mostly. Her mother worked 2 shifts at a hospital laundry and came home smelling of bleach and other people's fevers, and she loved Tendai in the way that exhausted people love, which is to say, completely and from a distance. The grandmother was the center of the world. Her name was Nomsa, and she had come to this country at 19, with 1 suitcase and a sewing machine and a head for numbers that nobody in any office had ever thought to use. For 41 years, she kept the books for a chain of corner groceries owned by a family who paid her in cash and never once put her name on a door. She did it at the kitchen table after her own long days, by the light of a single bulb, in a cloth-covered notebook she filled with columns so neat they looked printed. She could find a missing dollar across 9 ledgers faster than the family's expensive accountant could find his own coat. And every night when Tendai was small, Nomsa would sit her at that table and teach her the one thing she said could never be taken away. Numbers do not lie, baby. People lie. People lie with their mouths and their suits and their certainty. The numbers just sit there and wait for somebody honest enough to read them. Tendai still had the brass disc from that table. It was the back of an old pocket watch, the works long dead, the glass long gone, just a warm scuffed brass case the size of a large coin. Nomsa had used it as a paperweight on the loose pages of the notebook. When she died, year Tendai turned 17, there was almost nothing to leave. There was the sewing machine, which the cousins took. There was the notebook, which Tendai kept in a shoebox under her bed. And there was the brass disc, which Tendai had carried in her pocket every single day since, through a community college accounting certificate, through a state school finance degree paid for with 3 jobs, and a small terrifying loan, through the interview where a managing director had glanced at her resume and asked, not unkindly, whether she was sure she would be comfortable in their kind of environment. She had said yes. She had not said that comfort had never once been on the menu of her life and that she had stopped ordering it a long time ago. That was 9 months before the room with the empty chair. The internship at Harlow Stride was the kind of thing that happened to people from her neighborhood. Roughly never. The firm bought companies. Sometimes it fixed them. Sometimes it stripped them for parts and sold the parts. It managed $19 billion and it occupied 4 floors of a tower, with a lobby like a cathedral, all cold marble and brushed brass, and a security desk staffed by men who watched her badge in just slightly the wrong way every morning for the first 2 weeks, until her face became familiar enough to stop being a question. She was assigned to the deal team for a transaction the firm called, in its private shorthand, Project Lantern. Project Lantern was the acquisition of a company called Meridian Foodways Group, a regional food distribution business that supplied groceries, school cafeterias, and hospitals across 4 states. On paper, Meridian was beautiful. Steady revenue, long contracts, thin but reliable margins, the kind private equity loves because thin reliable margins are a thing you can squeeze. The firm was going to pay $612 million for it, most of it borrowed, and the model said they would double their money in 5 years. The man running Project Lantern was a managing director named Garrett Vance. Tendai had watched Garrett Vance for 9 months, the way a person watches weather they have to walk through. He was 48, lean and quick, with the kind of expensive haircut that looks careless and cost $400, and a voice that never rose because it had never in his life needed to. He wore charcoal suits and a thin steel watch and a habit of saying a person's first name twice in a sentence when he wanted them to feel small. He was good at his job, that part mattered, and it would matter more later. He was not a fool, and he was not a cartoon. He was simply a man who had decided long ago which kinds of people had ideas worth hearing, and Tendai was not one of those kinds of people, and he had never once examined that decision because nothing in his life had ever forced him to. Her job on the deal was the work nobody senior wanted. Document review. Reconciliation. Sitting in a windowless room they called the data room, going line by line through 10,000 pages of Meridian's records, checking that what the seller claimed matched what the seller could prove. It was tedious and it was invisible, and it was, as it happened, exactly the work her grandmother had trained her for at a kitchen table 20 years before. She was good at it. She was better at it than anyone on the floor, and the reason was simple. And it was not a credential. But she read the numbers like Numsa had taught her, not as a wall of figures to be skimmed and signed off, but as a story that a real company had actually lived. Every number had to have happened somewhere. Every dollar had to have come from a hand and gone to a hand. When a number could not point to the hand it came from, Tendai stopped and looked, the way you stop when a familiar song hits a wrong note. 3 weeks before the signing, on a Tuesday, she hit a wrong note. It was in Meridian's accounts receivable, the money the company was owed by its customers. A big, healthy number, $210 million, sitting in the financials like a promise. Schools and hospitals and grocery chains that owed Meridian for food already delivered, money that would come in like clockwork, the kind of asset that made the whole deal safe. Tendai noticed something small first. A single contract, a hospital system in the second largest of the 4 states, listed as owing Meridian $18 million. She had seen that hospital system's name before, that same week in a stack of news printouts another analyst had left in the break room. She remembered it because of the photograph. The hospital system had filed for bankruptcy protection 2 months earlier. Its cafeterias had been taken over by a national contractor. A company in bankruptcy does not pay its $18 million food bill on the old schedule. Often, it does not pay it at all. She did not panic. She did not run down the hall. She made a note in her own small hand in the margin of her working binder, and she kept reading. By midnight, she had found 4 more. By 2 in the morning, she had found 19. 19 of Meridian's biggest customers, accounting for 140 of the $210 million the company claimed it was owed, were either in bankruptcy, in the middle of switching to a competitor, or disputing their bills in writing. Tendai had the letters. They were in the data room, in a subfolder, 3 layers deep, scanned, crooked, and named with a string of numbers, the way a thing is named when someone is hoping it will not be opened. The receivables were not an asset. $140 million of that beautiful safe number was smoke. Meridian was not a healthy company being sold at a fair price. Meridian was a company that knew exactly what was coming and was selling itself fast to a buyer who had not looked in the right drawer. If Harlow Stride signed on Friday, they would borrow against an asset that did not exist. Within a quarter, maybe 2, the truth would surface, the debt would come due, and the firm would be holding a wreck it had paid $612 million for. People would lose jobs. Pensions tied to the fund would take the hit, and the intern in the windowless room would be the only person who had seen it coming and the only person nobody had thought to ask. She sat very still in the empty data room at 2 in the morning with the brass disc in her hand and her grandmother's voice in her ears. The numbers just sit there and wait for somebody honest enough to read them. She typed for 3 hours. She built a single, clean document. 19 customers, each with its dollar amount, each with a specific piece of evidence, each evidence file named and located by its exact path so that anyone could open it and see what she saw. She did not editorialize. She did not write a single angry word. She let the figures do what figures do when you line them up honestly, which is to make a lie impossible to keep believing. At the bottom, she wrote one sentence. The adjusted receivables reduce enterprise value by approximately $140 million, which materially changes the basis of the transaction. She sent it to Garrett Vance at 5:40 in the morning, and then she went home and slept for 90 minutes and came back. Here is the part people get wrong about a story like this. They think the hard part is finding the truth. The finding is the easy part. The numbers will tell anyone the truth if they read. The hard part is what happens when you carry the truth into a room that has already decided not to want it. Garrett Vance read her email at 6. By 8, he had not replied. By 9, Tendai understood that the silence was the reply. She found him by the coffee machine on the 31st floor at 9:10. He was not alone. He was talking to a second-year analyst named Brett, a tall, confident young man with a firm handshake and a father who golfed with 2 of the partners, and when Tendai approached, Garrett did not stop the conversation. He let her stand there, half in and half out of it, for a long moment before he turned. "Tendai," he said. "Tendai, I got your note." She waited. "It's good that you're thorough," he said. "We like thorough. You have to understand, though, the deal works at a level you're not going to have yet, and that's fine. That's what the internship is for. Those receivables have been diligenced by the bank, by the accountants, by the seller's own auditors. You found some news clippings and got spooked. It happens. It happened to me when I was 25. The receivables are confirmed by the seller, Tendai said. The dispute letters are in the data room. They contradict the seller's own schedule. That isn't a news clipping, that's their own paper. Something passed across Garrett's face then very fast, and it was not anger. Anger she could have worked with. It was the small irritation of a man who has stepped in something on the way to somewhere important. He set his coffee down. "I'll have Brett take a look," he said. "Brett, take a look at her thing." "And Tendai," he said, and here he smiled, "do me a favor and keep this between us until Brett's confirmed it either way. Last thing we want is to spook the partners 3 days out over a rounding error. Okay, good." He picked his coffee back up. The conversation was over. She had been handled. She should tell you, because I will not pretend it did not happen, that something in her chest went cold and tight in that moment, and her face stayed perfectly still while it did. She had felt this exact cold before. She had felt it at the security desk her first week. She had felt it the time a partner handed her his empty cup at a reception because he assumed she was catering. She had felt it her whole life, the particular sensation of becoming invisible in a room while remaining physically present in it, of watching people decide what you were before you opened your mouth and then never updating the file. She went back to the data room. She did not cry. She did not call her mother. She opened her clean document and she read it again, slowly, looking for the mistake Garrett was so sure she had made. There was no mistake. What there was, instead, was Brett. Brett did take a look. Brett took a look the way a man takes a look at a problem he has already been told the answer to. 2 days later, he produced a 1-page memo of his own, and the memo concluded that while the intern had raised some interesting questions, the receivables were appropriately reserved, and the seller's representations were standard for a transaction of this type, and the deal model held. Tendai got a copy because it mentioned her in the careful, bloodless phrase the intern had raised some interesting questions, which is the phrase "powerful rooms used to bury a true thing." Politely, she read Brett's memo 3 times. It was confident, it was well formatted, and it was wrong. And it was wrong in a specific way that told her Brett had never actually opened the subfolder 3 layers deep, because if he had, he could not have written the sentence he wrote. He had reconciled the receivables against the seller's summary schedule, the same schedule that was the lie. He had checked the lie against itself and found that it agreed with itself. Of course it did. She could have stopped here, and it is worth sitting with that because it is the truest part. She was an intern. She had done her job. She had raised the flag in writing, with evidence, to the man in charge. If the firm wanted to sail into the rocks, that was the firm's $19 billion and not her 3 jobs worth of savings. No one would ever blame her. Almost anyone would have let it go, and almost anyone would have been entirely reasonable too. She did not let it go, and the reason she did not had nothing to do with the firm. It had to do with a woman at a kitchen table who had spent 41 years finding missing dollars for people who never put her name on a door, and who had told the small girl that the numbers wait for whoever is willing to read them, and who had not meant it as a comfort. She had meant it as an assignment. So Tendai did the only thing left that was hers to do. She built the case so completely that it could not be handled. Not argued, not buried in a polite phrase. Handled. She went back into the data room, and this time she did not stop at the 19 letters. She pulled the underlying contracts. She found in the fine print of Meridian's largest supply agreement a clause that let that customer cancel without penalty if Meridian changed ownership, which a sale to Harlow Stride would trigger, which meant another $40 million of revenue was not contracted at all, but optional, and the option belonged to the customer. She built a corrected model, her own, clean, conservative, every assumption sourced to a document, every document located by path. In her version, the company was worth not $612 million, but about $420. The firm was about to overpay by nearly $200 million for a business that was actively coming apart. She did not send it to Garrett. Garrett had made his choice. She found out that the final signing was a closing meeting, 11 in the morning that Friday. On the 31st floor, the partners present, the sellers people present, the lawyers present, the pen on the portfolio, a ceremony, a formality. By the time anyone sat down at that table, the decision was supposed to be already made, and her corrected model was supposed to be already dead. She also found out because she paid attention to the things people in power do not bother to hide from someone. They have decided is furniture that the partner who chaired the investment committee, the one who had actually authorized the firm to sign, was a woman named Adorora Eze. Tendai had met her exactly once, in a hallway for 9 seconds. Adora Eze was 53, the only black partner at Harlow Stride. The only one of any of the partners who had ever looked at Tendai's badge, and then at Tendai's face and said good morning, as though the second thing was more interesting than the first. She ran the investment committee with a reputation for 2 things: brutal questions and a refusal to be rushed, and Garrett Vance Tendai had noticed was always very slightly more careful in the days before he had to present to her. Adora Eze would be in the closing meeting. She would not have seen Tendai's corrected model, because Garrett controlled what reached her, and Garrett had buried it under a 1-page memo by a second year named Brett. So Tendai made a decision. And it was the decision, the whole title of this story turns on, the call they could not make because they did not know what she knew. She decided she would be in that room. She had no invitation. Interns did not attend closings. She had spent 9 months becoming invisible in that building, though. And invisibility, she had learned, is a door that swings both ways. The person nobody looks at can stand anywhere. At 10:45 that Friday, she printed 12 copies of a single document, not her angry version, not an accusation. A 2-page summary, calm as a tax form, titled simply Receivables and Contract Review, Project Lantern, with the 19 customers, the dollar amounts, the cancelled supply clause, the corrected enterprise value, and at the bottom every source path so that any one of 12 powerful people could, in 90 seconds, open a laptop and confirm that the intern was telling the truth. She put the 12 copies in a plain folder. She put the brass disc in her right pocket. She put on the same plain grey blazer she wore every day, the one with the small mend at the left cuff her grandmother's sewing machine would have laughed at, and she walked to the 31st floor, and she stood against the back wall of the largest conference room in the only space a person without a chair is allowed to occupy, and she waited. Nobody asked her to leave. Why would they? She was furniture. She was the girl who refilled the data room. The clock read 4 minutes to noon. They were running late. The way these things run late, full of handshakes and small jokes between men who were about to move $612 million and wanted everyone to feel relaxed about it. Garrett Vance sat 3 seats from the head of the table, glowing. His deal, his triumph, 9 months of his life about to become a number on his record. The seller's chief executive sat across from him, a heavy, florid man who laughed too easily. The lawyers murmured. The pen lay on the portfolio. The 12th chair at the head stayed empty. Then Adorora Eze walked in, and the room stood up a little in its posture without anyone actually rising, and she took the empty chair, and the temperature of the room changed. She did not make small talk. She set down a single legal pad. She said, "Before we paper this, I want to walk the receivables one more time. Garrett, the customer concentration always made me nervous. Tell me again why I shouldn't be nervous." And Garrett told her. He was smooth. He was good, genuinely good. And this is the part you must not skip, because a defeated man who was never any good is not much of a story. He walked her through the receivables with total confidence. He cited the bank's diligence and the accountants and the seller's audited representations. He said the concentration was a feature, not a bug, that it meant durable, institutional relationships. He said the word durable twice. He had an answer for everything because he had built the whole deal, and he believed in it, and belief is the most convincing thing in any room. Adorora Eze listened. She tapped her pen once, she said, "And the bankruptcies? I read something about one of the hospital systems." And here was the moment. Garrett did not blink. One account, he said, reserved for immaterial. He smiled the smile he had smiled at the coffee machine. "We diligenced it," he said. "We're comfortable. The pen on the portfolio, the picture, no one had touched. 4 minutes to noon become 2. We're comfortable." The whole deal balanced on those 2 words, and they were a lie. Not a malicious one exactly, but the worst kind. The lie a confident man tells because he never opened the drawer and assumes the drawer is empty because he cannot imagine a drawer he did not open. Adorora Eze reached for the pen. Tendai stepped off the back wall. She did not raise her voice. She had decided, somewhere around the 3rd hour of that 2 in the morning night, that whatever happened, she would do this the way Nomsa would have done it, which was quietly, with the paper in her hand, letting the numbers be louder than she ever needed to be. "Excuse me," she said. "Before you sign, there are 18 more accounts." The room turned. 12 faces, and the seller's people and the lawyers, all of them turning to find the source of a sentence that should not exist, and finding a young woman in a mended grey blazer holding a plain folder, a person most of them had never seen and none of them had invited. Garrett moved first. "Tendai," he said, and his voice was still soft, but it had something new under it. "Tendai, this isn't the place. We've been through this." He turned to the table with an apologetic little laugh, the laugh of a man brushing lint from his sleeve. "One of our interns," he said. "Very thorough. We addressed her questions last week. It was a perfect move. It was the move that had worked his entire life. Name her small, name her young, name the thing already handled, and let the room's relief at not having to deal with an interruption do the rest. In 1 second she would be walked out, and the relief in the room would harden into resentment, and the pen would come down, and she would spend the rest of her short career at the firm as the intern who made a scene at a closing. She felt the cold tightness again. She let it come. She did not let it move her face. "You addressed 1 account," she said. "There are 19. I have the documents. They are the seller's own documents." And then she did the only thing that could possibly work, which was not to argue, because you cannot out-argue a managing director in front of partners, but to make the room able to check. She stepped forward and set 1 copy of her plain 2-page folder in front of Adorora Eze and 1 in front of the partner to her left, and she said in the same level voice, Every number on this page is sourced to a file in the data room. The paths are at the bottom. It takes 90 seconds to confirm any of it. I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to look. I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to look. That was the sentence. That was the whole 9 months and the whole 20 years and the whole walk-up apartment and the kitchen table compressed into 11 words. And it landed because it asked for nothing except the one thing a room full of people who pride themselves on rigor cannot refuse without indicting themselves. She had not asked for trust. Trust they would never have given the furniture. She had asked them to do their own jobs. Aurora Ez looked down at the page. She did not look up for a long time. The seller's chief executive had stopped laughing. "Garrett," Aurora said, still reading. "The hospital system in the second column. The one you reserved for. It says here they filed in March and the cafeterias went to a national contractor in April. Is that right?" "It's reserved for," Garrett said again, but the word reserved was thinner now. "It says they're disputing the full balance in writing," Aurora said. 18 million. And the one below it, the school district, also disputing. And the chain in the third state, switching suppliers, with a cancellation clause that triggers on change of ownership. She set the page down flat. She finally looked up, not at Tendai, but at Garrett. "Garrett," she said, "did you read these letters?" The room was very quiet now. 2 minutes to noon had become noon, and the clock on the glass wall ticked over, and no one moved. Garrett Vance was good, and so he did not crumble. And watching a competent man meet the edge of his own confidence is its own kind of education. He reached for the page, he scanned it, and Tendai watched the thing she had been certain of for 2 in the morning arrive on his face in real time, the slow understanding that the intern had not gotten spooked by a news clipping, that the intern had read the actual drawer he had not opened, that the lie he had told 30 seconds earlier with total sincerity was a lie, and that there were 11 other people in the room now watching him learn it. He did the thing powerful people do at the edge. He tried to fold her back into his story. "These are aggressive characterizations," he said. "Disputes get resolved." "The reserves account for normal course," he said, and did not finish the sentence. "The reserves account for $9 million, Tendai said. The disputed and uncollectible receivables total 140. The contracted revenue that becomes optional on change of ownership is another 40. It's on the page. I built a corrected model. It's the second page. The enterprise value comes to approximately 420 million, not 612. She had said the numbers. She had said them in a low, even voice, in order each one sourced. And there is a particular silence that follows true numbers spoken plainly in a room that has been pretending, and that silence fell. Aurora Eze turned the page. She read the second page, the corrected model, for what felt like a full minute. Then she capped the fountain pen. She set it down on the portfolio, on top of the signature pages, deliberately, the small definite click of a cap going on, and in that room, that click was the loudest sound anyone had heard all day. "We're not signing today," she said. The seller's chief executive started to speak. She raised one finger, not even her whole hand, and he stopped. "We are going to take 72 hours, she said, and we are going to walk every one of these 19 accounts against the underlying paper, and if it comes back the way this young woman says it does, we are going to reprice this transaction or we are going to walk away from it. And either way, the firm is not signing a $612 million agreement at noon on a Friday on the strength of the word comfortable." She looked at Garrett when she said comfortable. She did not raise her voice either. She did not have to. The room had already done the arithmetic that mattered, which was not about Meridian at all, but about which person in it had been telling the truth. Then she did the thing that the whole story had been walking toward, the thing the niche promises and so rarely earns. The moment a person with power says the true thing out loud in front of witnesses, so that can never again be unsaid. "What's your name?" she said to Tendai. Across the table, in front of all of them, Tendai Makoena. How long have you been with us, Miss Mokoena? 9 months. I'm an intern. Adora Ez nodded slowly, and she looked around the table once at the partners and the lawyers and the smooth man named Garrett who had run Project Lantern, and she said, "This is the analysis I should have had on my desk 3 weeks ago." She let that sit. Then she said, "I'd like to know why I didn't." That was all. She did not accuse anyone. She did not need to. She had asked a question with an obvious answer in a room full of people whose entire profession was answering exactly that kind of question, and the silence that followed was Garrett Vance's verdict, delivered not by a judge, but by the absence of anyone willing to answer on his behalf. Tendai stood at the back of the room with 12 copies of The Truth in a plain folder and the brass disc warm in her right pocket, and she did not smile. There was nothing in her that wanted to smile. She felt something closer to what her grandmother must have felt all those nights at the kitchen table, finding the missing dollar by a single bulb, the quiet of a thing finally set right, which is not the same as joy and is better than joy because it lasts. The 72 hours confirmed every number. It took less than 72. By the end of the second day, the firm's own forensic team had walked all 19 accounts and found exactly what Tendai had found to the dollar plus 2 she had missed, which brought the whole to 148 million. The supply clause was real. The cancellation right was real. Meridian had known. The seller had built the timeline of the sale specifically to close before the next quarter's collections would expose the receivables, and the firm had been 90 minutes and one capped pen away from buying the wreck at full price. They did not walk away. Adora Eze was not in the business of walking away from a company that could be fixed at the right price, and Meridian, bought correctly, was fixable. The firm went back to the seller with the corrected number, and the seller, caught with the paper on the table and no clippings to blame, took $410 million or watched the deal die in public. They took it. The firm acquired Meridian for $202 million less than it had been about to pay at noon on Friday, and within 18 months, run honestly, the company stabilized and the school cafeterias and the hospital kitchens it supplied kept running. And several thousand people who had never heard the name Tendai Mokoena kept their jobs because an intern with no chair had refused to let a true thing be handled. You want to know what happened to Garrett Vance? People always do. I will tell you, but not the way you might want. He was not marched out of the building. That is not how these rooms work, and the story does itself no favors by pretending otherwise. There was no shouting, no security guard, no public ruin. What happened was quieter, and if you understand these rooms, far worse for a man like him. Project Lantern, the deal that was to have been the triumph of his year, became in the firm's private memory. The deal he had nearly lost $148 million on. The deal an intern had to stop at the closing table because he had told the partner the word comfortable about a drawer he never opened. The next large transaction did not go to him. The one after that did not either. He was not fired. He was something a man of his particular pride finds harder to survive. He was no longer the person whose word in the room was the last word. He had spent a career deciding which people had ideas worth hearing, and he discovered, slowly, over a year of meetings where his certainty was now politely double-checked, what it is to become one of the people who are not quite heard. He became, in the only way that registers in a place like that, invisible. He learned the lesson by living inside it. There is a justice that does not shout. It simply moves the right person to the front of the room and lets everyone watch who was standing there all along. And Tendai, the internship ended in June, the way internships do. It ended differently for her than it began, though. Adora Eze offered her a full-time seat, not as a favor and not as a gesture, but in the plainest language, because the firm had nearly lost $148 million, and the only person who had read the actual paper was a 27-year-old with a community college accounting certificate and a state school degree and a habit of reading. Numbers like a story somebody had really lived. The seat came with a real chair at a real table. It came with the first salary anyone in her family had ever earned that did not have to be split across 2 jobs. She took it. Of course, she took it. She did not take it the way you take a prize, though. She took it the way you accept an assignment, because that is what her grandmother had taught her a gift like this actually was. There is a small thing I want to leave you with because it is the truest image in the whole story, and it happened on her last day as an intern before she came back in July as something else. She went down to the cathedral lobby, the cold marble and brushed brass, the security desk where her badge had been a question for 2 weeks, 9 months before. The same guard was there, an older man named Cyril, who had eventually started saving her the good parking validation and asking about her grandmother, because she was the only one of the young people who had ever told him she had a grandmother worth asking about. She stopped at his desk. She took the brass disc out of her right pocket, and she held it for a moment in the light. The dead watch with no glass and no works, just a warm scuffed case that a woman had once used to hold down the loose pages of a notebook at a kitchen table that no office had ever thought to call into a room. "What's that?" Cyril asked. "It's the only thing my grandmother left me that the cousins didn't take," Tendai said. "She used it as a paperweight. She kept the books for people who never put her name on a door." Cyril looked at it and he looked at her and he said, "Well?" He nodded toward the elevators, toward the 31st floor, toward the room with the table and the chairs. "They put your name on a door now." "Not yet," Tendai said. "They will, though." She closed her hand around the brass. She felt the warmth of it, the warmth her own palm had given it across 9 months of standing against back walls, and underneath that the deeper, colder warmth of all the years it had spent at a kitchen table being held down by a woman who balanced 9 ledgers after midnight and was never once asked into the room where the real money moved. Numbers do not lie, baby. People lie. The numbers just sit there and wait for somebody honest enough to read them. She had read them. In a room that had not asked her to, at a table she had not been given a chair at, 4 minutes before a pen came down on the wrong number, she had read them out loud, and a room full of people who had decided what she was before she opened her mouth had been forced, by nothing more than the truth lined up honestly on a plain 2-page folder, to update the file. If you have ever stood at the back of a room that did not save you a chair, holding something true that nobody asked you for, I think you already know the rest of what I would say, so I will say only this. The chair was never the thing. The chair is what they decide to give you after they can no longer pretend they cannot see you. The thing was, the reading, done honestly at a kitchen table by a single bulb, for years, for no audience, until the one morning it was the only thing standing between $340 million and the truth. Read your numbers, keep your paper, stand where you are allowed to stand. And when the room finally turns, do not ask them to believe you. Ask them to look.